Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Good to see so many folks flowing in. I see some more flowing in. Welcome to tonight's pre-Pesach learning. One of the many ways that we're preparing for Pesach over these few weeks. It's really such a privilege to welcome back Rabbi Mike Moskowitz. Those of you who are with us for Slichot learned with him there as well. But for those who may not be fully familiar, Rabbi Mike Moskowitz is the scholar in residence for trans and queer Jewish studies at CBST at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah, which is the world's largest LGBT synagogue. He's a deeply traditional and radically progressive advocate for trans rights and a vocal ally for LGBTQ inclusivity. Rabbi Moskowitz received 3 ultra-Orthodox ordinations while learning in the Mir in Jerusalem and in Bet Midrash Govoha in Lakewood, New Jersey. He's a David Hartman Center Fellow and author of Textual Activism. Rabbi Mike Moskowitz, it is such a privilege to welcome you back to BJ and learn with you tonight.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a distinct honor and pleasure to be here. And thank you so much for the invitation and also for the opportunity to continue the conversation that we started on Leil Slichos, the night of Slichos. Tonight, we're going to be talking about Leil Seder, the night of Passover, but very literally, Leil Seder means the night of order. That there's a way in which the entire year it's disorganized, it's out of order. And on the night of Pesach, we reorganize the world to the ideal. I would like for this to be a conversation. I would like for us to be able to be in dialogue. And so we have a source sheet. I believe is it in the chat yet? It's going to be in the chat, but we're also going to share the screen, and we're going to pause frequently to ask for questions. And if at any point you feel motivated to ask a question through the chat, you're certainly invited to write questions at any time, but we will be pausing periodically. I want just to remind everybody where we left off in the conversation around allyship as spiritual practice, that we spoke about Leil Slichos. The Hebrew word for ally is chaver. Chaver means really to attach, to cleave. An author is a mechaber. They attach words and thoughts and ideas to paper. If something's attached to the ground, it's mechuber l'karka. The word chaver, to attach, to like the Latin word for origin of ally, means to bond, like an alloy, means to come together. So the plural of chaver is chabura. Chabura it's a collective, it's a group. And the Karban Pesach, the Passover offering on the night of Passover, needed to be eaten in a chabura. The converse, on the other end of the spectrum of the chabura, of the chaver, is the opposite of being together, is being divided, and that's the cherev. It's an anagram, the same 3 letters. Cherev means to separate, it's a sword, to split, and the plural of that is chorban. Chorban is destruction. The Beis Hamikdash is destroyed. It's now, we're living in a time of chorban. I would like to argue tonight that the destruction is not a punishment, but rather a consequence for the lack of chabura. That if we want to be able to have a relationship with God as a parent, we need to demonstrate our love for all of God's children as our siblings. If we want to be able to have God as a parent with a house, right now we're all living kind of in the remnants of a broken home. And seeing the night of Passover as the reorganization to the ideal, and seeing it as a preventative measure, that this year Tisha B'Av should not be one of destruction, but rather one of celebration, I think can help frame the Haggadah in a way that makes it make a lot more sense. So we're going to be focusing on the very first part of the Haggadah of the Magid, where, and we'll see it inside, where we acknowledge anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat. This year we're here, next year we're going to be in Jerusalem. But before we see some of the text inside, I'm curious if anybody has any sort of natural connections in their head already between the night of Passover and the night of Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the day that we celebrate both temples being destroyed. Does anyone have any recollection of any connections on the night of Passover? Maybe perhaps certain things that are on the Seder plate, other things that might have to do with the calendar, other things that might have to do with some of the text of the Haggadah that might be a reference to Tisha B'Av? If not, it's okay. But I want to invite people to share if they have thoughts. Joyce, please.
Concept of brokenness.
Yeah, absolutely. We break one of the middle matzahs to kind of get us into this the sensation of a loss of wholeness. Yeah, that's a great example. Burnt things. Yeah, there's an aspect of it. There's absolutely an aspect of it. The Ramah brings down in the Code of Jewish Law and Shulchan Aruch that one of the reasons why there's an egg on the Seder plate is to remind us of the mourning over the destruction of the temple. Let's take a look now at the source sheet. There's an interesting kind of gematria. Gematria is a type of numerology. It's not the source of a teaching, but it often will teach something that we already know to be true. So it's another layer of an illusion of something. So I'm going to share the screen, and we're going to go through this slowly. I want to just kind of bring people's awareness that part of the reorganization, particularly from the arc of Purim to Pesach, is that on Purim there's an understanding that everything is disorganized. It's v'nahapachu. There's a turnabout, right? It's almost like cleaning out to organize the closet. You first take everything and you throw it onto the bed. So Purim is knowing that we don't know. Ad delo yada. In fact, even the verse says, right? Who even knows if this is why everything has happened? God is concealed, everything is hidden. We even wear masks as a way of trying to prepare ourselves to reveal what's concealed by concealing what's revealed. And that's Purim, preparing us for Pesach. Pesach, you've got questions, we've got answers. In fact, we even know the questions that you're going to ask. We know everything. Who knows one? I know one. I even know where all the numbers go. Right? There's a complete confidence of the clarity of the order. And there are consequences to this kind of worldview. But during the year, we understand the Torah exists on 4 different main levels. There's the Pshat, the Remez, the Drush, and the Sod. It forms the word Pardes. So the Pshat is the simple interpretation. The Remez are the illusions, the Drushas are the homiletics, and the Sod is the mystical secrets. On the night of Pesach, there's no such thing as pshat. The pshat of matzah is flour and water. That's the pshat of matzah. But matzah is not flour and water. Matzah is a lot of other things. So if we drop the pshat, so you'll notice from the pardes, we take that which is the most concealed, the samech, and we reorganize it, that it is now at the beginning. And then it follows with the drasha and the remez. So the reorganization of Leil Seder is really that, like on a very fundamental level, to take the truths which are normally concealed and to lead with them. That literally we're going to put everything out on the table. That there's a way in which we transcend time and gender and day and night. And this world and the next. Elijah the prophet is there. In Chad Gadya, at the end of the Haggadah, we've already slaughtered the angel of death. It's written in past tense. We've achieved all that which needs to happen. And it's really a function of modeling the ideal to such an extent that we could even ask when the child asks, why is this night different from all other nights? Perhaps it's really rebuke that on all other nights, if you're hungry, you can come and eat. It's only on this night that if somebody's hungry, let them come and eat. But on all other nights, they can't. Why should this night of the ideal be different from all other nights? Why can't we get it right every single night of the year? Right, that might be, if nothing else, I hope that that itself is a nugget to take to the Seder this year, that we need to really think about, if once a year we can get this right, why can't we do it every single night? So this is the shift from the pardes, which is just kind of this orchard, which we're passive and we're appreciating, to the Seder where we're proactive and we are reorganizing it in a way that achieves the ideal. And in such a way, we can go from the Churban to the Chabura, right? That we can go from a time of being in a destruction to a time of unity. And that really the night of Pesach is the time that we're going to get together as a Chabura to be able to then prevent this year from being another one of Churban. And this is alluded to. I'm just going to move us out of the way. Maybe there's a way that we can move us further out of the way, but all right, we'll play around. This is the tour. It's the precursor for the Shulchan Aruch. And we're going to go through this slowly, and then I'll stop sharing the screen so we can make sure that everybody's on the same page. But Simin L'Kvias Hamayadim, the sign, the way to remember the establishment of the festivals is through an atbash. So the atbash is a form of gematria where you take the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the aleph, and you substitute it with the last, the taf, and then you just work in the bays and the shin, and then the resh and the gimel and the dalet and the kuf, right? And you come in to meet in the middle. It's known as an atbash. So if you can picture the aleph starting representing each night of Passover. So the aleph is the first night of Passover. So this year, the first night of Passover, Leil Seder, is Friday night. So the taf, from working from the other side, is going to be the beginning of the festivals. So the first night of Passover, the aleph, corresponds to the taf for Tisha B'Av, that this year, Tisha B'Av will also be Friday night. The beis, the second night, which is Motzei Shabbos, Saturday night, is the shin for Shavuos. Shavuos this year will start out Saturday night. The gimel, he writes here, is Rosh Hashanah, which is the resh. The daled corresponds to Kriyas HaTorah, which is Simchas Torah. Then the hay is Tzom Kippur, Yom Kippur. And then the vav, the sixth day of Passover, actually corresponds to that day of the week that Purim was. So Pesach projects for the entire year, except for Purim, where Purim prepares for Pesach. So what's a little bit interesting beyond the connection between the night of Passover and the night of Tisha B'Av is that Tisha B'Av, even though it's a sad day on the calendar, is actually a day that we don't say Tachnun. It's a day that the prophet still describes as a Moed, because dormant within Tisha B'Av is celebration, that Mashiach, the Messiah, is born on Tisha B'Av, because you can't have redemption unless you're, in exile. And so until the temple was destroyed, we couldn't think about rebuilding it. So the night of Passover, in terms of establishing the festivals, actually has within it the capacity to establish whether or not this year Tisha B'Av will be a happy day or a sad day. And it'll be determined by whether or not we get the memo on the night of Pesach. I want to pause because I know I said a lot of things very quickly. Does anybody have any clarifying questions or anything that they want to ask or review? There's no rush here. I'm sure people have had dinner already. It's not like the night of Pesach where, the faster you get through Magid, then you get to the soup faster. We're not in a ruch tonight. How did I translate Soid? Soid, I think, literally means secrets. It also means foundation. But I think it means like the mystical parts of the Torah. Its connection to Purim is Nichnas Yain Yotza Soid, that on Purim, there's a way in which we attempt to facilitate at least the recognition that which is the most exposed, the face, the external, our body, that by covering it in costumes and in masks, we acknowledge that we know that it's concealing something, right? That there's something bulky underneath, and that recognition of, we are all holding things that are much more essential to who we are. And I think that's the soid. The soid is the foundation. It's the secret. Mark, is that a hand? Please.
Yes. So I have a question. It kind of relates to the tension between the linear calendar and the cyclical calendar. So, and as Roli taught us and to reminds us, Pesach is the first, it falls in the first month of the year of months. And so in the linear calendar, Tisha B'Av is related only towards the end of the year, and it follows Pesach. And so the same way that Purim ended the year and Pesach begins the year. So the analysis that we're going through right now, I guess, is looking at the cyclical, the spiral, as we would say, not just cyclical, but ideally we climb, we climb higher, and therefore it's a spiral. But I just wanted to kind of get a clarification as to, when we start interrelating these different holidays, which calendar we're kind of like looking at.
Sure, it's a great question. So yeah, time has a texture, and we're going to see in some of the sources that Pesach actually happens on the calendar much earlier than the Exodus of Egypt. And for example, Tisha B'Av, it's not that the temples were destroyed and therefore it's a sad day, but because it's a sad day, that's why the temples were destroyed. And so even though, let's say, we have a lot of different calendars, right? The first Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, Arba, Rosh Hashanah, right? There are 4 different Rosh Hashanahs, so each one has a different, like the fiscal year, the school year, the work year. So we have a lot of different years. There are naturally some connections. For example, the month of Nisan. Do you remember how it's called in the Bible, or how it's called in early literature? It's known as
Chag HaAviv.
Ha'Aviv. So what's the root of the word Aviv?
Of.
Av, which is connected to Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, right? Also, if you think about the Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? Yetzias Mitzrayim is the exodus of Egypt. What do we call the period of time of the 3 weeks?
Yimei Ben HaMetzarim.
Bein HaMetzarim. It's literally the same letters. Mitzarim, the times between the sadness, between Shiv Asar B'Tammuz and the 9th of Av is known as Bein HaMetzarim. Mitzarim is the exact same letters in the same order as Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim is the exodus out of that narrow space of affliction and oppression, where the 3 weeks, we're stuck in the middle of it. We're stuck between them. So in terms of the relationship between time, right, the 3 weeks are simply, on some level, in necessitating another Yetzias Mitzrayim, right? So like, yes, there's a calendar and there are days on it, and like, yes, we're like transcending and all the things, but they're I think much more fundamentally kind of connected, that we were redeemed in Nisan, will be redeemed again in Nisan. So I think that these things are something that on some level, the calendar, the way that we have it, is a little bit too superficial to recognize the way in which things are really connected. But yeah, it's a great question. Does that help clarify? Okay, great. Other questions or thoughts so far? Wonderful. All right. I'm going to share the screen again. And we're going to go slowly through this very first part of the Haggadah.
Can you just make it a little smaller?
Like that?
Yep.
Yeah, sure. I think you're the first person who's ever asked to make it smaller. It's good. It's very good. Okay, so the Haggadah, of course, means to tell over, and this is the Magid section, the story section part. And it goes as follows. It's a mixture between Hebrew and Aramaic over here for reasons that we won't get into, but this is the bread of destitution. Everything gets lost in translation. This is the bread of poverty. This is the bread on which we say a lot of things that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat. Anyone who is in need should come and partake of the Pesach sacrifice. Now we're here. Next year, we will be in the land of Israel. This year, we are enslaved. Next year, we will be free people. So there's a lot about this that's strange. Perhaps the most obvious is if you want to invite people to a party, you have to give them some notice, right? If you want actually for people to show up and feel invited, you have to let them know before it starts. It's super awkward. I want to be able to take questions, but I also I'll go back to the screen. Was there anything else about that that struck you as strange? So I'm just going to share it again. Anything else over here that struck you as strange or needing an explanation about this is the beginning of the Magid section of the Haggadah? Take your time, and then I'll stop the share in a few seconds. Anything there strike you as odd, in need of an explanation?
Hungry and in need.
Good. Can you say that a little bit? Yeah, say that a little bit louder. That
hungry is one statement, and then the next statement is anyone who's in need. So why is it two different things mentioned? What's the difference?
Yeah, those are great questions, right? I understand if you're hungry, come and eat. But if you have a need, right? Who doesn't have needs, right? What kind of question is that? Like, we all have needs. Yeah. Anything else about it? And I think you can take a look at the source sheet in the chat directly. Andrew, did I see your name pop up? We are still slaves. Yeah. What does that mean? And how is this relevant for people who are in Israel? Right? For people who are reading this, like the majority of Jews, essentially now the majority of Jews live in Israel, they're saying this year we're here, next year we should be there, when the there is actually there here. It's very strange.
Could I also ask a question?
Please, David, absolutely.
Yeah. I thought the reason for matzah is because I thought it was because the Jews were in a hurry to leave, so there was no time for bread to be made because there was no time for it to leaven. But it's implying that the Jews ate matzah all the time when they were in Egypt. It seems to me a little disconnect there. I'm not certain which the teaching is, which is right.
Thank you. So the good news is that all of the teachings are right, but it requires an explanation, right? Because is it the bread of liberation that we were enslaved and we didn't have access, and then all of a sudden, because we were redeemed so quickly, there wasn't time to have real bread, and so it was special that we had matzah? Or was that not true? That this is like the bread of affliction that in Egypt, because like we just didn't have the resources, including like air, right, to be able to have real bread, they ate matzah. So one of the things that's very interesting and consistent, if you remove the pshat, right, that simple interpretation, if you remove the surface area, so then you're able to go below the surface and hold mutually kind of exclusive identities simultaneously without tension. This is a really important concept, so I'm going to try to give it a little bit of space and some examples. There's a way in which we are more complicated than God. Right? The one thing that we know about God is that God is one. God is simple, right? God holds complexity very differently than we do. God is singular. By us, we're compartmentalized. By us, things are divided. I'm sitting in this chair to the exclusion of all other chairs, right? In the physical finite space, it's this to the exclusion of something else. When you remove that, so then, and if you think about this, every aspect of the Passover Seder has kind of these duplicate and mutually exclusive identities. The charoses reminds us of the mortar, but it needs to be sweet. Those are opposites. The maror is meant to be bitter, but it's supposed to be green for renewal. We're supposed to dip into things to show that we've got an abundance, but we're dipping in salt water to remind us of the tears. The libation is supposed to be joyous, but it's supposed to be red for the blood. Right? The matzah is both the bread of liberation and the bread of enslavement. It's both of those things simultaneously, and they're not in contradiction because it's this and that. The way in which we are often this and that and another thing, and it's all part of who we are. So part of what I think the Gemara means that we have the arba l'shonos of geula. We have 4 languages of redemption. The Torah uses 4 different words. God took us out. God redeemed us. God is that. That language itself needs to be redeemed. That like language itself in its current state is always going to be more narrow and limiting than the expansiveness of the experiences that they were coming to describe. So when we think about even Moses being Aral Sifasayim, he had a speech impediment because if you experience the divine, how do you put that into words? So words don't do it justice. And particularly when we were enslaved, the idea of being able to even fantasize about what freedom could look like, what it could taste like, what it could sound like, right? To be able to give it language, right? There's a learning curve. So one of the things that I think even this particular segment of the Haggadah kind of introduces to us is that we need to be able to inhabit an awareness and a consciousness of a lot of different competing forces. For example, the Gemara says, it's a Rashi, it's on a verse. It says that when a person gives money to another, it uses this play of language of ani means I with an aleph, and ani is a poor person with an ayin. And so Rashi points out that when a person is lending somebody money, they should feel as if they are the ani, they are the one who's impoverished. And so we are going to be on the night of Passover, kind of going through this arc of being enslaved and being liberated. And our rabbis teach us that you can't appreciate the freedom until you know what it's like to be enslaved. And so part of what this is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate in Egypt, it's one letting us know that this is our first person national narrative, that we as Jews have this as our collective story. And so it's important to lean into that. And that contrast helps us frame and appreciate the freedom. I had a Rebbe, he should live and be well, he's not doing so well, Rav Matzio Solomon, the Meshkiach in Lakewood. And he's now probably in his mid-80s, late 80s now. And he grew up in England after, he was a young boy after the war. And I remember him telling me once that as a child, he would go to weddings of people who had lost everything. And under the chuppah and in the time of rebuilding from those ashes, they would talk about the horrors and the nightmares. And as a young boy, he said he found it impossible to understand why would you invoke those memories of those horrors at a time of ostensibly like moving on and joy and happiness. And he said as he got older, he came to understand and appreciate that the contrast of thinking that the night was never going to end, and then to be in a place of being able to rebuild, right? That it was a different experience than somebody who felt like it never was going to be able to be a reality. So I think part of what this introduction kind of invites us into is to recognize that it's not awkward for us to be able to claim a level of being impoverished, because we all have lackings, we all have needs, and we also have as part of our story that we were enslaved. Perhaps the most repeated kind of mantra within Judaism is Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, remember the exodus of Egypt. And one way to understand that is remember that you were enslaved, you were dehumanized, you were oppressed, and that posture of fragility, right, is something that people are still experiencing today. You know what it's like. Make sure that nobody else ever has to experience that. Mark, please.
So it's interesting, just picked up on that. So there's a polarity there in that first statement, because two people are at the same table eating the same food, but experiencing very different things. So I'm inviting in the poor, so I should be tasting the matzah as the bread of afflictions, remind me of what it was like. The poor person, I'm not serving him bread of affliction. I'm serving him bread of freedom.
That's right.
So the polarity is there right from the get-go. And of course, then you can condense the fact that there might not actually, I mean, to the extent that the people around the table may not, in fact, be inviting in the stranger, literally there. So that invites us so that to experience that polarity throughout the Haggadah.
Yeah, beautiful. And I think one of the things that this also kind of, the rabbis are sensitive to, that all disagreements, all division within people, all separations that we kind of enforce is it's coming from a place of our awareness of the deficiency of others without recognizing that we share those exact same deficiencies, right? That like, this person is this person is this person is, I'm perfect, right? I have all my stuff together, but everybody else, right? So I'm better, and they are other, right? It's a function of separating because I'm worthy, they are not. And part of what the search for chametz does, chametz in the rabbinic tradition, and we'll see this in the sources here, is a representation of the evil inclination. It's filled with hot air, it's filled with arrogance, where the matzah is really the basic unity between the water and the flour, and that creates a singular object called the matzah. And the matzah really represents the Yetzer Tov. And so on all other nights, we struggle with the clarity of the good versus the evil. On the night of Passover, it's not actually night, it's day, it's clarity. And so there is no chametz, there is no evil inclination. We're not worried about nuts. For those who don't eat it on Rosh Hashanah, right? Everything has nuts. Nuts has a numerical value as the word sin. And so like, we're not worried about it, right? And so there is kind of this awareness that I just cleaned out my closet. I know that there's schmutz there, right? I just searched in the cracks and the crevices of my soul. I know that I have work to do. So then I shouldn't let somebody else sit next to me at the table because they're not perfect. I know my deficiencies. I know, right, that I come from being enslaved. I know that I come from a people who's named after the struggle, right? The Chiddushei Rim says that Jacob's name is changed to Israel because he wrestles with the divine and overcomes. The word for overcome in Hebrew is tuchal. We are not called B'nai Tuchal, the children of those who overcome. We're called B'nai Yisrael, the children of the struggle. So part of Pesach is the recognition of the struggle that was, the struggle that's ongoing, and that in that place of struggle, we can all struggle together. Like, we're all trying to do the best we can. So like, once we recognize it, so then, and this declaration of, anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat, that's one piece. And anyone who needs something, so you've got needs, I've got resources, I have needs, you have resources, together we can come together and we can fix all of the problems, right? Because in social justice, all of organizing really is a function of reorganizing. So part of the Seder is a recognition of an equality and an equity and an accessibility that allows people to have equal access to the things which are necessary for themselves in community. Good. Any other thoughts or questions on this before we go on a little bit? Great. Fantastic. I see some people nodding their head horizontally. I don't know if they're like in disagreement with everything that I'm saying, or they don't have anything else to ask, but this is also a safe space. If you want to offer a rebuttal, this is I'm very, very happy to hear what people are thinking. Okay. So this is strange because we're inviting people to a party after the party has started. I want to offer three interpretations one is not, I can't remember if one is original or if I heard it somewhere and I said it over so much that now it feels like mine, but it could be that I am not the originator of this first. I am the originator of the other two. One interpretation here, which I think is the simple interpretation, is that the whole year we are distracted, right? We're focused on other things. And then on the night of the Passover Seder, when we think about the clarity of the divine, that had God not taken us out of Egypt, we would still be there. And so really, I'm only out of Egypt because God enabled that. And so like, it's not because I worked harder or like I had bigger bootstraps, it's because God helped me. And so as a result, like we just need to pay that forward. And so it could be at this moment, there's finally the clarity of like, I have a sense of communal responsibility, better late than never. So if you're hungry and you let them go and you need something to come and eat, please, of course, come. I'm sorry that I didn't get there earlier. I was distracted. That's one interpretation. I also think that this is coming to highlight a unique aspect that we have within our tradition, which is actually prioritizing people over the divine. And the Gemara says as follows: Amar Yehuda Marav, Gadol hachnasas orchim, greater is inviting guests, mikabalas pnei shchina, than even communing with the divine. How do you know? Vayomer Hashem imna matzasi chein beinecha al no ta'avor. Right? Abraham is saying to God, God, I have an essay about this in my book, Graceful Masculinity, which is written around the word chein, that Abraham is really trying to say to God, God, if I understood who you are, what you want me to do is mimic you, like you're compassionate, I should be compassionate. So I'm going to, don't go anywhere, but I'm now going to manifest your divine will by inviting guests. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Borei Shilu Kamidas HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then it continues. So in English, as when Abraham invited his guests, now of course these guests are angels that don't actually need food to eat, and God ostensibly is very happy, right? God waits for Abraham, etc. There are a lot of lessons here. One lesson is that, of course, they didn't really need food, and Abraham was on some level modeling just the right way to be. That part of inviting guests is actually bringing people in so that they should be able to experience what we think is an ideal way of being. As people who want to make the world better, when we go out into the world, we try to model for the universe and be a light to the universe, that we should inspire people to be good in all of the ways. And another way to do that is to bring people into our more private spaces, into our homes, into our apartments, and say, like, this is what this looks like in an interpersonal space at our table. Would love to model and inspire how to be the best versions of ourselves. What's also really interesting is that these angels don't stop there. They go on to stone. I don't think it's coincidental that we learn about kindness, both around angels that the rabbis understand that Abraham thought were idolaters, right? That Abraham was not inviting people in who were like-minded. One of the reasons why he's called Avram HaIvri, that Ivri, the Hebrew, that he was on one side of the world, like Aver Hayarden, the Transjordan, that he was on one side of the world in terms of monotheism, where everybody else was on the other side of the world with polytheism. So there were no like-minded people for Abraham to invite guests who saw the world the way that he did. But rather, he wanted to engage with people who saw the world differently, who engaged with the world, who moved about the world differently. And then we find the same angels going to Sodom. And he says, the verse says that he urged them strongly, so they turned his way and they entered the house. Lot prepared a feast for them and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. And you'll see here in the Hebrew what is unleavened bread, that Lot, who has these guests, again, the angels, the same angels, the people of Sodom want to hurt these guests. He protects them, and it's seen by some as the merit by which Lot and his family are saved, because he invites guests. The verse says, "Umatzos afa." They were baking matzahs and they ate matzahs. Now you might ask, this is several hundred years before the Exodus of Egypt. Why are they eating matzahs? Rashi was also bothered in one of the very funny Rashis on Chumash. Rashi says, why were they eating matzahs? Pesach haya, right? Because it was Passover. That's why, right? Why were they eating matzahs? Because it was Passover. So the way to understand this, of course, is that the 15th of Nisan, the Exodus of Egypt, happened because the 15th of Nisan is Zman Cheirusenu. It's the time of freedom, right? Where time itself is emancipated, right? Zman Cheirusenu, that Zman, that time is now free, right? So if time is free, you don't need to wait for 3,500 years ago for there to be Pesach on the 15th of Nisan, right? And the truth is, we know this that this happens with the blessings that Jacob gets, the blessings that Jacob gets. The reason why Isaac wanted the two goats were because it was the carbon Pesach, the Sfarim there say. So Zman Cheirusenu is a time of liberation. It's a time of being able to be free. And Hachnasas Urchim on some level is the process of taking somebody who might be experiencing food insecurity, who might be experiencing living unhoused, right? And you invite them in and you give them a break, right? You give them some freedom for a limited time of those oppressive basic needs that they might be lacking. So Hachnasas Urchim is itself a miniature aspect of liberation. It's temporary, right? You're not in your own house, you're in somebody else's, but there's an aspect of it. And the Gemara says that is even greater than the divine. So it could be, if we read this back into the Haggadah, that why are they saying anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat? Because we have a belief in our tradition that if we invite guests and we do it sincerely, so that's even greater than communing with the divine. And if we're able to do that, which is even greater than communing with the divine successfully, then of course we'll be able to commune with the divine on Tisha B'Av. Then of course God will rebuild God's house. Because we know that God's house was destroyed because of sinas chinam, because of blatant hatred. So the antidote for that is avas chinam, to be able to love, right? Baselessly. You're a human being, you have a pulse, so then come, I want to make sure that you're taken care of, right? So there's a unique aspect that if we read it back, I'll share the screen again and then pause for questions. If we read it back into the Haggadah, I think there's a way, I'll move us over. There's a way in which, right, this is the bread of destitution that our ancestors ate in Egypt. We know what that was like, and we don't want anyone else to experience it. So anyone who's experiencing aspects of this right now, come and take care. We're here to take care of you. And we have such faith in our tradition and in God's promise that now we're here because last year we failed. Last year we didn't do this well, but now we got the memo and now we're internalizing and now we're going to do it. So, okay, this year we're here, but next year, of course, we're going to be in Eretz Yisrael. This year we're enslaved because we haven't figured it all out now, but now that we're committing to it, so of course, next year we're going to be free, right? So I think that's one way to understand it. I want to pause, see how that lands for people. Ira, is that a hand? No, okay. It's a hand, but it wasn't being raised for this. No problem. Again, I want people to really feel comfortable. Thoughts, reflections, observations. Fran, it looks like you're typing. I don't know if it's a question. Yeah, you can type. No, it could be you're sending an email to somebody else. It's also fine. But if you wanted to speak,
it was
okay, great. So if you want, I don't want to put pressure on you, but if you want to speak, you know.
Not at all. I mean, it seems I've been doing a lot of reading in preparation for the Sidorim, and certainly it seems that, you know, there was the physical slavery and the physical freedom, but there's also a spiritual aspect to this. And when it says let all who are hungry, you know, maybe it's a spiritual hunger, because the whole thing around the Seder is asking questions. Let's discuss, let's open our minds. And that gives us the opportunity to become freer.
Yeah. I love it. I mean, I love it. I think one of the things that the Seder kind of really forces in terms of its template is hearing the voices of others, right? What does the wise one say, right? What do you say to the wise one, right? Like, they're different conversations. Like, I want a different perspective. I'm super, you know, I'm like spiritually dehydrated, right? I want to imbibe and I want to eat and drink and hear the thoughts of. Right, I think that's beautiful. Also, I don't know if Andrea is still here, but in our Gemara class at CVST, she pointed out that on the theme of organizing, that the first thing that we do is we sing the song Kadesh Orchatz, right? That we literally roadmap like the order of the day, right? That there are 15 stages, they correspond to the 15 steps and the 15 Dayenus and the 15 Sharamalas and the 15 days to the full moon, the 15, all the things of transcendence of the 15, the generations and the overlap of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, like everything's deep with meaning, but one of the ways in which we organize is it's like filled with declarations. Kadesh. We're going to become holy. We are holy. Orcha, right? And then like even from the very beginning, there's this arc of knowing where we're going to end up. So yeah, I think, I mean, as somebody who I manage, I get by in terms of time and all the things. I never feel like there's enough of it. But I'm deeply hungry for order and structure and normalcy. Like this world is on fire, right? And so I think, yeah, I think we come to this thing where on some level, like we know what's happening next, right? If you have families that are getting together that have traditions, you know, when I was a kid, some of my fondest memories, my grandfather, we would go to open up the door for Elijah. I was older before I realized, but my grandfather would drink some of the wine and then we'd come back and Elijah's cup would have less wine. I'd be like, oh my gosh, I missed him. How did it happen? I opened the door and I came back. How did he drink the wine? Right. So, but from year to year, like you know what to expect. My uncle would say the same joke, right? Everybody's got their shtick. So, right, there's something comforting about like, you know, that kind of routine when the routine is actually very nourishing and very supportive. Thank you for that, friend. Yes, is it pronounced Marissa? Just if you could unmute.
It's Marissa. Like
Marissa.
Vanessa, only with an M.
That's actually very helpful, Marissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So because you brought it up, only because you brought it up, this is for me, you talked about the wise child and you talked about the asking of questions, but it seems to me, and I've been saying this at other classes and it hurts me, that this is hurtful for me. I'm the child that asks aggressive questions. I'm the child that wants to know, Papa, what does this mean to you? I am not being wicked. I am bringing my family into me when I do that. I had a long talk with my grandsons, all three of them today, because I want them to come to the table and I want us to be talking about those children. I want to give them pride in being able to confront authority without being judged for it. I want them to feel that when they turn to me and say, Bubby, can you explain this to me? I don't say to them, well, obviously you're not part of us, you're outside. So this is very, very troubling to me. And because you brought it up, I'm putting it on the table. But, and I would like to hear some brilliance because you are amazing. I would like to hear something about that from you. Thank you.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. Right. The most problematic, I think, parts of Judaism are the ones that we feel like we can't ask, right? And right, because if you can't question it, so then like it's actually off limits and it doesn't speak to me because I can't speak back to it. And it's meant to be a dialectic. We're meant to be in relationship with the text. And I also like there's no shortage of inherited trauma in religion. And I think what we are trying to achieve is some sort of restorative religion. And that in my tradition, every question is a proof to something, right? If God is good, so if we see something in the world that's not good, so then it means that we're not understanding it. So being able to understand, to ask the question, how can God allow this to happen? Like we have to be able to ask that question if we want to be able to be in a real and authentic, genuine relationship with God. So I think that the Vilna Gaon, for example, Rav Eliyahu Kramer, who dies in 1797, he understands the four sons as actually an ABBA kind of structure. That the opposite of this of the wicked is actually the simple. You have the wise and the one who doesn't know how to ask, and the simple is not a lack of sophistication. Jacob is called Tom. Tom means simple in that it's not complicated. There's no tension. There's no complexity. I want to sit and learn. I wake up in the morning and I want to do what God wants, right? I'm making a beeline for the good. The way the wicked makes a beeline for the evil, the simple makes a beeline for the good. I don't have questions. You know, why is there, okay, because I don't know, because I'm not God. To know God would be the Kuzari says, to know God would be to be God. Because if you can understand the infinite source of the universe, you would have to be the infinite source of the universe, right? So I think in that space of like simplicity, it's not a pejorative, right? So I think one way that we can today reframe the simple is because everybody today has issues. I mean, we have issues with everything. Like I don't understand anything, right? I don't understand anything. So one way to frame it is like, you know, what's bothering you, right? We asked that question about Rashi. What's bothering Rashi, right? Rashi says something. Why is Rashi saying something? Because he's motivated, because something doesn't make sense to him. And he assumes that if it doesn't make sense to him, it doesn't make sense to us. So he's going to make it easier by writing a commentary. So I think that what also might be helpful in reframing it is a sfas emes. The sfas emes is from Ger. the Sfas Emes observes that there's an awkward placement of the word echad by each one. Echad chacham, echad rasha, echad tam, echad shenali de lishel. The word echad means one, and it doesn't translate well into English. Like, I'll show you in the Haggadah, just to show you on the screen. Can I share the screen? Yeah. Let me just. This is an important point. If it's okay, we'll go through this quickly. Is everyone able to see the screen now that is Safaria? Yeah. Okay. Great. So if we want Pesach Haggadah, and we'll start here at the beginning. So this is where it starts. Halach Manya. So here are the 4 questions. It's a false narrative. There's only one question. The one question is, why is this night different from all other nights? We give 4 answers, but it's one question. And to your point, one of the points of Passover is we're supposed to be questioning what we're told as the givens. How can you tell me that there are 4 questions and there's only one question? Right? Meaning, what else did they lie to me about? Right? What else isn't true? Right? But that's part of it. In other words, we're supposed to question what we question. Nothing's off limits. How can we have things which are off limits if God is revealed? If there's clarity, then everything should be able to make sense. So just to show you this one piece of the 4 sons, Baruch HaMakim Baruch Hu. So there's 4 Baruchs here, corresponding to the 4, which is also the 4 mothers. But see this word echad, echad chacham, the echad rasha, the echad, right? So here, one who is wise, one who is evil. The word one you don't need it there for the sentence. You don't need it in the Hebrew. You don't need it in the English. So the Sfas Emes points out that the word echad has a numerical value of 13, 1, 8, and 4. Echad is the one of God. It's the 13 attributes, like 13 and 1. It's all very important. But if you take the word echad, 13, and you multiply by 4, you get 52. 52 is the numerical value of the word ben, son, here. Beis, nun, this is just a plural, banim. Beis is 2, nun is 50. The Sfas Emes says that there aren't 4 sons. There's 1 son. And it's not even a son, it's a child. And it's not even a child, it's a person, right? That these 4 components represent each one of us. Each one of us have things which are more developed than other parts of us, right? There's certain things that we're not even aware of our lack of awareness, right? What my wife Wendy tells me all the time, like, do you know that you're screaming right now? And I said, I don't even know that I'm screaming, right? So there are things that we don't even know about, yeah? And so part of what this means is that it's not about othering. It's about looking inside ourselves and saying, you know what? I'm really good about certain things. I struggle with other things. There's some things which actually are not complicated for me anymore. And I know that there's like a whole space of a void that I'm not even aware of my lack of awareness. So I get another way to say this is that your questions are good questions, and like we need to be able to figure out a better language of taking the truths of what you're saying and seeing within our tradition that our tradition is not in opposition to that. Does that help a little? Great. Shari?
As you were discussing, like, first of all, the physical hunger and then the in need, meaning maybe other types of non-physical hunger, and also the concept of community, like the meal before Pesach had to be eaten in community. That was like a big rule of it.
That's right.
This year, I can't help but thinking about what's happening in Ukraine, and it's obviously physical hunger, but also it's totally destroying the community. Like, people are everywhere. They're not with their usual people. And I just, it's very striking to me. So
yeah, it's horrific. I don't have words. It's horrific, right? One person is an entire universe. And here you have, millions of children displaced, right? And you have people, it's horrific. There aren't words for it. I have nothing intelligent to say about it. It's horrific and words don't do it justice. And, sometimes the only thing we can do is pray, and sometimes that's not the only thing, and we all need to do everything we can. But certainly learning in the merit of all of the innocent people and the wicked people. The wicked people should repent and stop being wicked. It doesn't. There's an interesting Chassam Sofer. The Chassam Sofer, who lived during the Enlightenment, he points out that for the Rush it says hika as shenov, right? We blunt their teeth. So we're not a violent people that like we get into a fight in the world of ideas. We don't start hitting each other. It doesn't end well for us. That's not where we're meant to compete. So the Chassam Sofer says that if you take the word Rasha, the numerical value of the word Rasha for wicked, subtract the numerical value for the word Shein of teeth, you get the word tzaddik, right? Righteous. That the goal is to convert people from the evil. You know, Bruria, who's Rabbi Meir's wife, she's a very famous figure in the Gemara. The school's named after her. She's one of the early feminists in the Jewish tradition, very powerful. So there's these hoodlums that are like kind of harassing Rabbi Meir on the way back from yeshiva every day. And so he comes in, and so she says, "Nu, how was your day?" And he says, you know, these kids are just going to daven that they should die, right? These hoodlums. And she says, maybe you should daven that they should repent, right? And he says, okay, yeah, you're right, right? So there's wickedness in the world, but I think as part of what we need to at least attempt to believe is that people have the capacity for goodness. People are intrinsically good, right? And people do all sorts of horrific things for good reasons. Sometimes they need to be locked up for those reasons, right? It doesn't justify it, and it doesn't mean that you want them to be your neighbor, but we need to believe that not everybody who's doing bad things is permanently labeled as an evil person. Okay, let's come back to the Haggadah to the source sheet over here. And okay, wrong one. Here we go. Nope, we want this one. Sorry, too many things open. All right, so this is one interpretation from the Gemara that the reason why we're talking about inviting guests is because actually it's a way to kind of guarantee or to compete in a place that is even better than communing with the divine. If we can do this, then we'll be meritorious. I want to offer another interpretation. This one is very new. I just had this one this week. The Gemara in a few places asks, why was the temple destroyed? There are a few different answers. There are two temples. The first temple was for the three major sins: idolatry, adultery, and murder, avodah zarah, gilui rais, and shfichas damim. According to the second one, was sinas chinam. There's a Yerushalmi. There are different interpretations. So here, this is a Gemara in Gittin. A lot of the Gemaras that deal with the major Gemaras that deal with the destruction of the temple are in Gittin because it speaks to a certain kind of separation. Like almost, it's not a divorce that's permanent, but there's a certain kind of separation. Reb Tzadok HaKohen, who dies in 1901-ish, says. So this is when the Gemara says why, one of the stories of why the temple was destroyed, because of the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Now, it can't be that I'm the first person to make the connection. I just haven't seen somebody else do it yet. But I'm sure when I look, I'll find, because it wasn't obvious to me until yesterday. But once I saw it, once like it clicked in my head, then it seems that it's pretty obvious. So the Gemara says as follows: why was the temple destroyed? A Kamsa ubar Kamsa. These are two different names. There's somebody whose name was Kamsa, and there's somebody whose name was Bar Kamsa, the son of Kamsa. So the Marsha in the back of the Gemara says it's possible this was actually a father and son duo, which makes it even more complicated. But there were two people with very similar names. So it was on account of this incident, Charuv Yerushalayim, Jerusalem was destroyed. Again, Charuv is the same as Cherev, is the same as Chorban, it's destroyed. Tahahu Gavra, that there was a certain person, Derachme Kamsa Uval Devave Bar Kamsa. So a person very wealthy is throwing a party, wants to invite his best friend, whose name is Kamsa. So he tells his messenger, invite my buddy Kamsa. What happens? The messenger gets confused and he invites Bar Kamsa, who's the enemy. So Bar Kamsa shows up to the party, he's sitting at the table. And the Gemara goes on to explain that this guy goes up to Bar Kamsa and says, what are you doing here? And he says, I'll stop the share. And he says, well, what do you mean? I got an invitation. I figured you invited me. So I figured I would show up. And, he's like, no, you're my enemy and you have to leave. So Bar Kamsa says, listen, I'm here already. I'm happy to pay for whatever I eat or drink, but don't throw me out. It's going to be embarrassing. So the guy says, no. You can't be here. You're my enemy. So Bar Kamsa says, okay, listen, I'll pay for half of the whole party. No, I'll pay for the whole party. In the end, he throws him out. And the rabbis are there and the rabbis are quiet and they don't do anything. And this guy's embarrassed. And the Gemara says, because of this incident, right, the Jerusalem was destroyed. The person goes and gets involved, the non-Jews of the time. It's not good. So it could be that this Gemara is really in conversation with the Haggadah is really in conversation with this Gemara, that if the whole reason why the temple was destroyed was because of blatant hatred, and the pivotal moment was about an invitation to a meal where a person was invited and then thrown out, it could be that like the most logical declaration the night of Passover, if we want to make up for it, is to say anyone who's hungry, let them come and eat, and even if you are my enemy, like it doesn't make a difference, right? Like the whole reason why we're in a place of destruction right now is because we have this lack of chabura. So like we're enough already. Like we want. It's too much pain. The Gemara even says it's a Gemara I think in Makos. I think the Gemara says, I think it's Makos. It's in Megillah maybe. Might be in Megillah, maybe 28a. Thank you, Alan. The Gemara says that if a person sees a synagogue that was destroyed, and like grass is growing there, you shouldn't trim the grass. Meaning once it's destroyed, that like don't try to make it less destroyed. It might be worth seeing the Gemara. You can look up the Gemara in Safari, but there's a powerful idea here that when we think about destruction, it's not like there's a spectrum of this thing is abandoned and destroyed, but like the lawn is nicely mowed. Like that's not a space. It's destroyed or it's not destroyed. And the Gemara says, don't try to take away some of the pain of the appearance of the destruction. And the Gemara uses the phrase agmas nefesh, that a person sees a place that used to be a synagogue and it's in ruins. It's supposed to stir up feelings inside of you, right? It's supposed to make you feel the pain that motivates you to think about, well, why is it destroyed? Why is there destruction in the world? Why is God in the closet, right? Why can all of this happen? The only reason why this can happen is because we don't have the clarity of the divine, because God is so concealed. So when we think about the pain of recognizing that the plight of the universe, all the bad things which are happening now, it's only because we don't see the value of human life, of human dignity. And another way of saying that is that we've taken the divine out of people. Because if you see the divine in people, you can't bomb them. If you see the divine in people, you can't shoot them. You can't hurt another person if you see the divine in them, because that's God. That's God's child, right? That's God's self inside of the soul. You have to protect that person, right? It's family, everybody's family. How do you do this? So part of what I think is coming up in the night of the Seder is that, like, when we think about we were enslaved, we're also still enslaved, right? We were in exile, we're still in exile. We're still here, but we don't want this anymore. Like, enough already. It's too much. It's gone on now for thousands of years. My Meshkiach, Rav Solomon Shlita used to point out that for the first temple, for the big three sins, we got 70 years. There was 70 years of an exile between the first temple and the second temple. That's when the Purim story happened. And then for the second temple was destroyed because of blatant hatred. It's now 2,000 years. So he said he used to joke that, like, you would think we would get a better lawyer, get a better deal out of it. But he said it's not that it's a punishment, it's a consequence, right? Like, we cannot have a house where God is at the head of the table, whatever that means, if we can't treat each other like family. So I saw there was another comment here. We're voting the truth. So now I don't know if you want to say more about that. I don't disagree with yours.
Well, the truth of when you said that, mowing the lawn in front of the destruction doesn't take away from the destruction. And also that each of us has good and bad. And that the truth is that each of us is created by God. And that's what I mean by the truth.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you for giving context. Yes, meaning, and I think what that enables, right, that recognition is that we're all a work in progress. So, like, we can all come together and, like, say, like, this is what I'm working on, and, like, how have you found success in this, and what are you struggling with? Oh, I used to struggle with that also. This is what I found to be helpful. This is what I found not to be helpful. Maybe be helpful for you, right? There's a way in which, right? But you're 100% right that when we just, like, put on new paint, right, to something that's rotten, it doesn't help. It doesn't help. Yeah, it's impossible for me not to think about Isabella Wilkerson and Cast and, what it means to think about inheriting a house that's moldy and fixing, but in terms of Cast, but yeah. Okay, we have 16 more minutes. I want to run through a couple more sources, and then very happy to hear more thoughts. There's an aspect of matzah and chametz. I mean, this is it's the tip of the iceberg in all of the things. But there is an additional connection between cohesion and separation of chametz and matzah. I just want to name it. the numerical value of the word chometz. So chometz and matzah are basically, they both have a mem, they both have a tzadi. One has a ches, one has a hey. So just to show you, this here in the bottom right, that's a ches, right above it's a hey. The only difference is that little space. The only difference between chometz and matzah is that little extra bit. You let it rise. It's filled with hot air. It's essentially the same ingredient. So matzah represents, right, is the one that has the space. Matzah it's taking up the appropriate space. The chometz is taking up more space than it's entitled to, right? So chometz has the same numerical value as the word chalak. Chalak means is the root of the word machloikis, to separate, to fight, to make a distinction. So you can just see here, ches and ches. So chelkam is the plural. So the mem at the end is not part of the word. It's just what makes it plural. So chometz is ches and ches. Mem is 40. Tzadi is 90 for 130. Here, lamed is 30. Kuf is 100. So that's 130 and 8. So chometz and chalak, the unleavened bread and disagreement, division, have the same numerical value. As in contrast to the word matzah and kahal. Kahal is a gathering. It's a community. Kahal is an assembly, a congregation. So matzah, I don't know if we have matzah here, but matzah mem is 40. Sadi is 90 for 130, and then hey is 5, so that should be 135. And if you look at the word kahal, kuf is 100, hey is 5, lamed is 30 for 135. So kahal, and this pasuk here, Exodus, is talking about matzah. You shall keep watch over it, the matzah, until the 14th of the day. Sorry, this is talking about the Karban Pesach, but it's in the context of matzah and Pesach, that you shall keep watch over it on the 14th day of the month of Nisan, so it's Erev Pesach, and there it talks about the kahal. So there's a connection again between the congregation and matzah and this coming together and chometz. And one final source here, just to kind of speak out, is on the topic of min hametzar, right? So bein hametzarim and yitzias mitzrayim. So min hametzar, right? From the distress I call out, karasi ka anani b'merchava ka. So the word cherev or chaver is also the same word as rochav. Rochav is also the same three. So the three letters that form the word ally, ches, reish, chaver, ches, reish, beis reish, chaver, and cherev as an anagram also are the same three letters as the word bachar, to choose. It's also as barach, to run away. And one of the things that's really interesting is we're in Egypt for 210 years, practically enslaved. You'll notice that the word chaver, so ches is 8, beis is 2, so that's 10, and then the third letter reish is 200. Chaver has a numerical value of 210, which is the same as cherev, which is the same as rachav, which is the same as barach, which is the same as bachar, right? It's the same three letters. That there's an aspect of either coming together or coming apart. And it's not just in the word of chaver. You see this also in the word pirud is separation. And rodef is to pursue. It's the same three letters, reish daled pei, pirud or rodef. So either a person can separate out or you can run towards. And what's interesting, and it's on the source sheet, but I have an essay in the book, Graceful Masculinity, called Graceful Allyship, where Moses is called a chaver. He's called an ally when he goes and engages in saves the Hebrew from the Egyptian who is who's trying to kill him. And just 2 verses later, right, he goes from running Paro's home to then running from Paro. But that verse where it says where he runs away, it uses this word barach, to run away. And there's this and then it takes a bunch of decades where he goes to Midjan, and he's no longer engaged in the process of trying to help directly the Israelites. And so it seems very much like there's this recognition that either there'll be a chabura or there's going to be a charban, right? It's one or the other. A person can run away, a person can engage, right? To be complacent, to as long as the silent majority is silent, right? It doesn't make a difference, right? The silence is complacency. The Gemara says shtika kahida. So a person is just neutral, right? Neutrality I think Elie Wiesel and Nelson Mandela and everyone understands, always helps the oppressors, right? Because if you're saying, listen, I'm not going to get involved, right? So it's the opposite of actually doing something about it. And so when we think about what the night of Passover teaches us, right? When we talk about the Egyptians being slaughtered, why are the Egyptians being slaughtered? They were just following orders, right? They were just, right? But that's the point, that like, if you're part of a society that is organized, that's predicated on the supremacy of some at the expense of the basic dignity of another, and you're part of that dominant culture and you're contributing to it, right? So then, you know, what's the phrase? Some are guilty, all are held accountable, right? Whatever it is, right? I don't remember the words. I don't remember even who said it. But right there, say it again.
Responsible.
Everybody's responsible. So we're all responsible. Thank you. So that's what I want to try to kind of invite us to think about, that when we sit at the Pesach Seder, right, that we should really open ourselves up to acknowledge both the space we are in the universe right now, like what is happening around us, what's happening in Texas, what's happening in Florida, what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening among the people who really are stepping up and showing up and doing the things, and what's happening in our own lives. Like, what are our struggles? What are the struggles in our own neighborhoods, in our own communities, right? In the conversations in our own head, in our own heart, what's going on in our own family? When we think about the ways in which we try to artificially separate ourselves from other people, the way in which society has separated us, right? I think it provides a certain recognition that like we're all lacking, right? There's a huge void in the fact that we cannot get together and we cannot kind of celebrate in a world where these things are not ongoing. And the question becomes, you know, at what points does the awkwardness of the current state become enough to motivate us to create a new state, right? To create a new reality. And I think that's what's supposed to happen to us on the night of Passover, where we recognize that these working mechanisms, right, and these systems of oppression and marginalization, they're not any different today than they were then, right? They're people who have more power than the average person and the majority of people, and they want more power at the expense of those people who are really struggling. And the question is, what do we do about it, right? Like, how do we make space to think about not how to respond, and that there's voter suppression, so we'll figure out how to get people to the polls, but how do we restore the world to an ideal space that there's no voter suppression? Like, what can we do as a society to think about the ideal way of being? Who do I want to be in my relationships with people at work, at school, at home, in my family, in the world? Who do I want to be in relationship with myself, with God? Like, what is the ideal way of being? And then if the night of Passover can give us certain clarity about like what's really important in the world, and the way in which we can elevate human dignity, and the way in which we're bearing witness right now to what happens when we take away the value of human dignity, that this is a natural consequence. That like people are shocked. How is it you can bomb these things? Well, like, if you don't care about people, why wouldn't you bomb people? Like, that's not the part that's complicated, right? So like, what can we do to kind of lean into our recognition of how bad things are, how bad things have been, and what can we do to really kind of change it? So I want to pause. I know we have a few minutes left. Want to hear people's responses before we kind of end with a final thought. But any questions or thoughts on how to reorganize and the way in which the Haggadah kind of lets us know how the story ends if we can get it right, and how the story will end if we can't get it right? Sandra, please.
Yeah, it just occurred to me, thank you for giving me an insight, that it's in inviting people into the Seder, whether you actually invite them to your particular table this particular year, to me, I'm starting to realize that it's aligning yourself with other people in need. And one of the ways, the big way that people get powerless is that they fight against other people in need. So, I mean, the ideal would be that there's nobody trying to overpower other people, but it's just not human nature. But one thing that people can do is to ally themselves and not compete for the resources, but to help each other and become a power in themselves. And I hadn't really seen that connection with the Seder until you've explained it. So thank you.
Well, thank you for giving that voice. And yeah, there's a lot of infighting, particularly in progressive spaces. I mean, there's infighting everywhere. But I think, in my lifetime, I don't remember a time where it was more divisive than it is right now. So there's a lot of work to be done. And thank you for bringing the awareness that we have a lot to do in our own camps. We have a lot to do in our own spaces. Yeah, thank you for that. Alan. Just, if you could unmute.
Okay. First of all, it's a great zechut to be here with you and to learn from you. Thank you so much for this. I've always wrestled with that question: is matzah freedom or is matzah oppression? And I think what you're saying is the whole point of the evening is to say, oh, the two are so intertwined, and that we have to work so hard in order to separate them by the end. Because halach ma'anya, in some ways, it seems like it's a bread of affliction, but on the other hand, why would we start with it if we weren't hopeful? And that wonderful comment that was made tonight by our Gabbai saying that you wouldn't feed the poor person the matzah being of affliction, right?
Right.
So a lot of this really is fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I mean, part of what I think this kind of echoes is that, no one person has 613 commandments. Like, we're not meant to be in competition with each other because we each have a unique role to play that nobody else can play, right? Hillel says, if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? Because nobody else is me, right? Nobody's competing to be me. So why in the world would I try to be competing to be somebody else? If I'm somebody else, who's going to do what I'm supposed to do, right? And so when we think about, right, what that means to be able to show up and that in the order of the world, God doesn't put extra people in the world, right? So if we're here, that means that we have something to do that nobody else could do, because if somebody else could do it, why would I be here, right? So there's a great Yerushalmi in the Durham that asks why does the verse that tells us to love another like we love ourselves, the beginning of that verse talks about don't take vengeance. Don't take vengeance, we have to. And the Yerushalmi gives a parable: a person cuts their left hand while they're chopping vegetables with the right hand. So the left hand doesn't take the knife and stab the right hand to take vengeance. Why? Because it's one body, right? But that's what it means. We have to love another like you love yourself. Like, you wouldn't take vengeance on your own body. Why would you take vengeance on another person? Like, you're all part of the same humanity. So I want to end, unless there's another, I think maybe we have time for one more question or one more thought if somebody has it. So one thing that I just want to kind of offer as a final thought, and with tremendous gratitude for all those who are here and made tonight what it is. It would not have been the same if you weren't here. It's as difficult as life is for us now with COVID and the universe in all of the ways. I think it's also worth recognizing that it's not easy for God. And I don't think that we have a lot of compassion for God, because God's God. God's the infinite source of the universe. If you didn't want such a messed up world, why'd you make it, right? And I think one of the things that Judaism tells us is that God didn't make a messed up world. God made a perfect world. God made the Garden of Eden. Right? It was literally the utopia, and we broke it. God said, no, we didn't listen. And then all of the horrific things that have happened in this world have happened because we've broken it. And so when Hillel and Shammai are arguing, is it better to make the world, better not to make the world? And they say better that it shouldn't have been made, and now that it's made, we should work on trying to make it better. What it means is the world in its current form shouldn't have been made. Why would anyone want this world, right? The world that God made is perfect. But it's not too late. We have the ability to correct it. We have the ability to fix it. And so part of what I think allyship asks of us is to also to be aware that God is a partner in all of this, right? We can partner with the infinite source of the universe, but God is also, it's not a safe space for God. Like very in the most serious way, God said, here are my boundaries in the garden. And like, this is what I need. I need you to see me. I need you to understand who I am for who I am. And the same thing happened with the golden calf, right? Just 40 days later, God's like, I don't understand. I told you the infinite source of the universe. How is it that you're right? And so God's, listen, it's not safe. It's not safe for me to be out as who I am. The divine revelation was God's coming out speech. And the night of the Pesach Seder, actually provides an opportunity for us to say Baruch HaMakim Baruch Hu, right? Blessed is God, the omnipresent. God is everywhere all the time. And the more that we can create a world, right, that is not so antithetical to God's values of compassion and mercy and kindness and human dignity, so then God won't be concealed anymore. And so the night of Passover also, I think, gives us an opportunity to feel into the divine presence in a way that provides the comfort that God is supposed to provide for us. That even King David in the valley of the shadow of death fears no evil, ki ati modi, because God, you're with me. But we don't necessarily feel that. So I just want to invite people to try to lean into a little bit what that might feel like on the night of Seder, both for ourselves, but also for the divine. The divine is, the Gemara says that about God and Moses, that God uses the same language of tsar, that God is in the same pain that we are in. And it's hard for us it's a different conversation what that all means, but there's comfort in knowing that we're not alone. And I think of the comforts that the Haggadah gives us is that Baruch HaMakim Baruch Hu, that God is everywhere all the time, even in the exile. When we say the last thought that when God tells us about God's self, God doesn't say Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I'm Hashem your God who created the world. God says, I'm Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt. That even in Egypt, even in the exile, even the oppression, God is with us. So this year, that there should be a complete liberation and equality for those who are accustomed to discrimination. Equality feels like liberation, and may the world be liberated, and may we finally be able to celebrate again together in Jerusalem with everybody in peace and happiness. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for making this possible.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Mike. What a wonderful evening. May we take this through the coming week into our Sedarim and upcoming Chag Sameach, Zis and Pesach to everyone.
Thank you all so very much. Kol tov.